Richard Hogan. Absolutely delighted to have you
Gavin,
here.
it's great to be on the podcast. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, I'm buzzing, man, because I have been reading your latest book, the new book, Home is Where the Start Is. And so much of that resonates with me. I think it would resonate with every single person because they have had a home to start from. And within that home, there are certain dynamics that have influenced the type of people they've become in today's world. And will give them a lot of insight, answers, and information as to why they behave or act or live in a certain way today, understanding that this comes back to deep, it goes to deep roots, not only in their previous family, but down to
intergenerational.
Yes, generational families and things in the past. So it's been incredibly insightful for me. Has brought even further awareness for my journey. So thank you for writing that.
Thanks very much. You're very kind.
And I will be diving deep into that book. You're also the author of Parenting the Screenager, which is such an important book for today's world. I'm a father myself of a nearly 13-year-old girl.
Me too. Snap there.
Yeah. So it's good timing with a book like that. I think so many parents need it because parents of this generation have come from a childhood where they weren't exposed to social media or phones or screens to the extent as their children today are. Like when we were 13, we didn't have phones, we didn't have social media, so it's very difficult for us to manage that with our own kids, not having experienced it as our own 13-year-old selves. So I think it's incredibly useful to have that information. So we'll dive into that as well, but I want to sort of bring it back to home is where the start is and bring us back to the start for you as well. What did home look like for you?
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. Home for me was very, it was like nice and lovely. And my grandmother lived with us for 20 years. That was fabulous to have my grandmother in there. She was a great Irish Cork woman, great crack, great sense of humour. So everything functioned very nicely at times. And we had nice evenings out and there'd be kind of events. And my father wrote for the Irish Times. He was a Munster correspondent, so he's pretty well known and all that. So the facade of everything was pretty good. And then in reality, he struggled with addiction. And as we got older, I watched his life, stumble and then spiral into addiction. And I watched a very talented, very intelligent, very smart, clever guy become disillusioned and kind of like, maybe bitter with his life and how it turned out. And then as a result, we were all along in the ride, on the ride with that. And so it was pretty tough at times, and the house could be quite dysfunctional and it could be chaotic, and there could be really, difficult scenes in the house. And I just remember one scene that I wrote in the book that got actually a lot of people wrote to me and a lot of people picked up on. And I was coming through my estate in Grange Erin where I grew up. I used to stand on my tippy toes to see if the car was home. And if the car was home, I'd have a sinking feeling because you don't know what you're going into. The environment is uncertain. And it's that uncertainty very hard to live with, because then some days it all worked so perfectly. My grandmother would be watching Glen Rowe, my parents, we'd be playing the guitar together, writing songs, and it was all just normal. And I suppose that's what was so difficult about the childhood. We could go on summer holidays and it'd be nice going to France, and then it could be a chaotic scene in a restaurant in France, or a chaotic scene in the holiday home, and the whole holiday was spoiled because of what happened because of alcohol. And I'm not alone as a child who grew up in alcoholic father and struggled with addiction. There's a lot of us out there. And I suppose that's what really, I didn't even think about that when I was writing the book. The idea of children from alcoholics. I was just telling my story about my father who had addiction and how it impacted my development, how it impacted on how I talked to myself, how it impacted on what that voice up there, which is the most important relationship any of us have, is that voice, and how it became corrupted, and how I struggled a little bit with dyslexia as a kid. That definitely, just derailed a positive voice up there. And so all of that was feeding into this kind of sense of, as I hit my late teens, I would say melancholy. Sadness was kind of definitely wrapped around me like a fog. For a while I was unreachable inside that fog. And it took me a long time to figure that out, and I got punished in school. I got labelled as wild, and I certainly was well able to get in trouble and go on the hop and go into town and go into the arcades and hang around and not take school too seriously. Nothing in school had any value for me in primary school. Sitting in a prefab. And the chalk itself used to drive me insane, Gavin. The sound of the chalk, then the dust from the chalk, and then Irish. I was like, what in the name of Christ has this got to do with my... I used to be looking out the window dreaming about being John Lennon. That's what I was thinking about. And they were like, Paul agus Sheila Gimmert Pella. And I was like, what the fuck has this got to do with me? And I felt so disconnected from education, and I struggled with reading and spelling, particularly, which was weird because I'd get really good marks in my essays, and then I'd struggle with spelling, which I found very strange, And my brothers were flying ahead and very academic, very smart guys, brilliant students and all the rest of it. And I struggled with it. And that label then, I suppose, was there, not as good as the others. And I definitely told myself that, whether I heard it or not, I definitely told myself that, And they're the invisible things that create. None of us come into this world thinking, I'm not that good, I'm not that clever, I'm not that funny, I'm not that nice. We develop that from our feedback, from our environment and all that. And I certainly picked it up. And it wasn't until 5th class that I met this incredible teacher that said to me, you're very smart and you might have dyslexia too. And I was like, fucking hell, yeah, maybe is that something? Will that be something that's going to get in the way? She's like, yeah, her own brother had it. This teacher called Richard Hogan, and I never told anyone for years. I know I'm a bit rambling and going off in a different case, but I never told anyone for years. I teach English at a high level, in different and all that, and I love English. And you can see from reading the book, I like writing, and I write every week for the Irish Examiner, a column, for the Irish. I've been doing that for nearly 7 years now, whatever. And I write my pastime, and I wrote Parenthood Screen Age, and I've written, Home Was With the Starters, was nominated for an Irish Book Award. It's like, how is that incongruent to dyslexia? Someone who struggles with spelling and words. And then as I researched it, I was like, as a kid, W.B. Yeats had dyslexia, our finest poet, and his handwriting was brutal. You couldn't make sense of his handwriting. You couldn't make sense of my handwriting. I wouldn't have been able to write that book if I hadn't got a laptop. There's no way I would be able to write a book. I couldn't look at my own handwriting, And I wrote an article about it in 2021. Now I was 45 or something when I wrote that article, and I have never spoken about it. And I wrote the article in the Examiner about my experience growing up with dyslexia, and it was a nice article, and I referenced Bridget O'Grady, and I said that she changed the trajectory of my life by seeing me. And I think that's all any of us want, to be witnessed, right? And nobody saw that there was hassle in my house, or no one saw that there was addiction in the house. No one saw. They were blinded by the veneer of my father's status. He had a big status in Cork, Munster correspondent for the Irish Times. He'd be on RT News, and writing every week for the Times and all that. And so teachers used to show me his articles, which used to gall me. They'd call me up and say, look at your dad, look what he wrote. And I'm like, oh yeah, brilliant. Last night he was trying, something else was happening in the house, And so that used to kind of gall me. But anyway, I wrote that article, and I referenced her. And the next morning I was in my clinic, and I had an hour off. When I was on lunch, sitting in my clinic having an hour off, going to just relax and close my eyes for an hour. And my phone pinged, an email came in, and it was from Bridget O'Grady. And it just I was, every time I talk about it, I get a bit emotional. I was back inside the skin of that 8-year-old who thought of himself as stupid, who saw himself as not clever, and just disconnected from everything. And I was like, Jesus, I was bawling, crying in that clinic for about an hour. I couldn't get myself back together. And my mom rang me, and she's like, what's wrong with you? I was like, I can't freaking talk to you right now. I was just emotionally, because that's what happens to us. We bury all those emotions. And we go off in our lives and we're successful and we do things or whatever it is, but they're all in there. And they're all these invisible things coming from our family of origin. Our families are messy. I don't think my story is anyway more remarkable than anybody else's story. And the amount of emails and handwritten letters I've gotten from that book has been incredible. It's better than any bloody book award. It's absolutely incredible to hear somebody say that changed my marriage, that saved my marriage, that changed my life. I had one woman ring me saying my husband was dyslexic all his life, and talked to himself so badly. He read your book, and now he's gone to therapy, and he's working on himself. And I was like, Jesus, if that was it, if that's the one person the book touched, isn't that enough? You know what I mean? And so we come out of these messy families, Gavin. We've all had them. And there's loads of invisible forces driving us, our early attachments, how we talk about ourselves, what people said about us, where we came in the family, top, middle, bottom, only child, whatever it is. All of those things are invisible forces that drive us in our life. And our parents label us. You know, the eldest daughter, we get the good daughter. I've 3 daughters myself, and I can see myself sometimes saying, you know, that's great, Hannah. Would you mind doing this? I'm telling her she's great, so I can get her. It's manipulative, like, and I can hear myself doing it because I have all the theory in my head as I'm talking, and it's like, geez, that's terrible, but it's like, you know, it's like the event horizon of a freaking, you know, what's it called? What do you call those freaking black holes? You know, it sucks you in.
Yeah.
And we label our kids not because of badness, because of how complicated the family is.
Mm-hmm.
So you're the sporty one, and you're the clever one, and you're the lazy one, and you're the wild one. And we break our children down into just such myopic terms. And then they get straitjacketed by those, and they live them out. It's confirmation bias. They look for the confirmation. Yes, I'm not the academic one. The amount of kids I work with in my clinic who say to me, I'm not that book smart. And I say, hold that thought. Let's explore that idea, right? And it's incredible to see them actually kind of go from this position to kind of like actually, you know, sitting back and going, yeah, maybe I have something to offer the world.
Mm-hmm. It often takes somebody from outside of the family to identify the gifts that you have, such as Bridget O'Grady.
And it's incredible when someone does it, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, it's incredible, yeah.
Because they've no skin in the game in your life, you know. There's nothing for them. They're not your aunt, they're not your uncle who loves you.
Of course.
They see something in you.
What was in that email that floored you?
The first line floored me. She said, and I always remember it. I think I put it in the book. I remember you well, Richard. You were a beautiful little boy. That even as I say that now, I get like chills there because I didn't think I was a beautiful little boy. I didn't see, you know, when you respond emotionally, I know it's because of something, you know, really deep in there. And I didn't see myself as a little beautiful. I saw myself as a chancer. I saw myself as wild. I saw myself as, you know, trying to deflect what I believed was an intrapsychic problem with me, you know, that I was dumb or stupid, or I had all those kind of ideas going around, definitely in primary school. In secondary school, it kind of, you know, got a bit better because I started to do well in some subjects, and that it wasn't until college when I got a laptop that things changed, you know. Mm-hmm. But I still had the negative voice. I remember I did my first year English exam, and the university wrote to me, the Department of English wrote to me to say, you came in the top percentage of the class, so we'd like you to keep the subject on. And blah, blah. It was just like, you know, I was really kind of going, oh yeah, they must be hard up. That was my response. That was my interpretation of that. The inner
critic was,
It was the internalized prejudice, you know. Yeah. How could they want you, like, you know? And so even when I was getting firsts in my degrees and all that kind of stuff, and scholarships and Fulbright scholarships and all, you still have a little voice in there that's that kind of, you know, who are you to do this, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And you just got to work it out. You got to listen to it, and you got to work it out, because it's a paradigm that's not fit for purpose, and it's going to steal the miracle of you, you know, your life, you know, the incredible magic of you sitting here and me sitting here, 400 quadrillion to the power of 150,000. That's like, mathematical terms, almost zero. It should be zero, but it's almost, because here we are. Mm-hmm. And so that's magic, you know. To be born is incredible magic. Now, it gets tainted along the way sometimes because your family and going to school, into the yard, what people say to you, you take that stuff on, and you just, like, you know, I watch it all the time. I often think the human brain is not designed for happiness, you know. It's designed for, like, you know, going right for something, somebody saying something negative about you, and then consuming that, and then believing it, and then trying to, like, either bring it into your life, prove it's correct, you know. And that stuff is the rotwood of joy, you know. It's terrible stuff.
Tell me about your grandmother and the influence that she had in your life.
She was great.
She, judging by the book, she seemed to have been your savior.
She was great crack, you know. And I played so many pranks on her growing up. I remember she loved the lottery, and one week I recorded the lottery results. And then she said to me, she used to call me Boyeen, will you pop up and get the results for me? I said, I will. I'll go up and get your numbers for your grand, no worries. And I played, it was about 3 weeks earlier. I played the 3 week earlier numbers, you know, and then I stuck it in the VHS and left her with the winning ticket. And she came running into the house screaming, we've won the lottery. And so she didn't talk to me for about 2 weeks, but she was just great crack, great, really good fun. Like, you know, I remember getting caught stealing light bulbs from a Christmas tree, and the guards brought me home, and she opened the door. She's about 74 at the time, and she said, "Don't worry, guard, I'll sort out my son for you." And I was like, "Oh, nice one, Grant," because my father would have killed me if I got caught stealing Christmas tree lights from the Douglas Street Village Christmas tree. And so she was always like that, like a friend, you know. And she'd say to me, you know, I mean, she wasn't a parent, definitely not. She'd say to me, like, you know, do you want to go to school or not? And I'd say, I won't bother. She goes, nah, sure, you know enough. You're grand. She was born in 1912. Different Ireland, different ideas about education and all that kind of stuff. But she was just someone I'd go into at night after going to a chipper or whatever, or, 2 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning. I'd knock on her door and go in. She'd be, how are you getting on, Brian? Do you have a good night? She was never someone to say, I'm asleep, leave me alone. She was just always, that kind of like, that kind of person that everyone needs in their life. Someone who just listens to you and doesn't kind of judge and doesn't give you advice and just they're just there.
That was, I was drawn in by the story about your grandmother because I had someone similar in my own life.
Yeah.
It would have been my auntie, and again, a savior when my mum and dad would get angry with me or I did something that was maybe out of turn. True, of course, trying to do their best for me based on the information they had. But anytime that I was punished by mum and dad, my auntie would be there to say, she'd go,
no judgment.
You know what? They'll laugh about this in a few years' time. I know what.
Yeah.
It's just a bit of crack. And she had this sort of rebellious nature that I feel like I've almost taken on in my own life. It's push against the boundary, go against the grain, question the status quo. Don't take things so seriously. It's not how it is. And even from my own parenting, I can see parts of that coming out as a father to my children as well, where
it's good, isn't it? It's great.
Just bring a bit of understanding and no judgment around their behaviors and actions. So, I was very intrigued about the relationship you had with your grandmother. And when she passed, then what sort of void did that create for you in your life?
Yeah, that's the thing about death, isn't it? I mean, it's the profound finality of that you'll never hear her voice again. I found that very hard, and I have her voice in my head all the time talking to me. She's a good man, Rich. I can hear her talking to me, and calling me. And when my daughter was sick in hospital, my last daughter, youngest daughter, had a rare condition, and she was very sick, and we were told it mightn't be viable and all this kind of stuff. And so she was 3 months in intensive care. I could hear my grandmother going, "You can do this. You'll do this. She'll be fine. Head up, keep going." Because that's what she would have said. Just keep going. Can't do anything else. No point thinking about it. Just keep going. And it is a hard thing when someone dies, especially when they were meaningful in your life, and then especially when I had my daughters, I'd love her to see, because she always loved girls. And I could see her going, geez, Richard had because my brothers had boys, 2 boys, 4 boys between them. And so I could see her going, geez, Richard had girls in the end of the time, wasn't it great to bring the girls into the family? And so that's the kind of sadness that's always there, that she got to miss out on that, and that you got to miss out and sharing it with her. Yeah.
But at the same time, she is shining through you as well.
She's
instilled
absolutely.
a lot of love and joy and resilience through you.
Yeah, I wrote a poem about her. I write poetry. I remember that line. I said, like the star whose light has long since died, you shine on us. Like it's like that, the idea of the star up there that shines on you, see it, but it could be dead and gone, but it's still shining. I said, that's exactly it. I used to have that idea that she's here. It's through me, and her thinking is in how I think, and her ideas are how I see the world, and her perception is kind of like how I see the world. That's kind of like the great thing about family.
Mm-hmm. Then you've got this incredible contrast between her and your father.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Tell me about him.
As you said that there, I just had an image of my grandmother saying, she had funny English, it was like the Irish English, she'd say sentences, you're kind of going, what the, do Dick don't like him, do he? I remember she said, I was like, what the hell is that, Gran, as a sentence? She had this old Irish kind of English, broken kind of stuff. But I remember one time my father was shouting at me, do you hear me? Like my grandmother was like, he do, Dick, he do. And that's the way she was. She'd always jump in and try to,
she was your backup.
Yeah, she was the backup.
Support.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, it was, my relationship with my dad was, it was difficult. There's no doubt about it. At times it became physical. And there was always a threat of violence there, and you never felt that there wouldn't be something that might happen in any moment. And he's a human being who struggled in his family. I have no animosity or, anger or any hostility towards him. I can see him as a really talented individual who struggled to achieve his potential and then lost into addiction, which we often do when we're not really happy with ourselves. And I'd say there's probably some other stuff in there as well. And so he struggled, and then his struggles were our struggles as well as a family, And it was a very difficult relationship for sure.
You were angry with him though?
Oh yeah, Jesus, yeah. I was very angry with him. And if I met him in my 20s after he left the house, if I was walking on Patrick Street in Cork, it could have been a serious problem, And we had a physical altercation one night. when I was like 16, that's the start of the book. I talk about going to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist diagnosed me as depressed, right? And diagnosis, and was depression, and then his answer to that was Prozac, and so at 16 or 17 I was taking Prozac. I knew I wasn't depressed. I'm actually a fundamentally very optimistic and hopeful and kind of happy guy in a lot of ways, right? I mean, I have my moments like everybody else, but I knew I wasn't depressed. I knew my environment was depressing, and I knew that was a difference even at that age, But my father used to say negative things, and comments about me taking medication, and so that was hard. And they used to make kind of jibes about it and call me because I used to love writing poetry. Call me the black poet and all this kind of stuff. Just like these really negative kind of things thrown at you all the time. They'd build up over time, especially when you catch them having an affair and all that kind of stuff. You're kind of, I've been putting up with a lot of this all my life. It's kind of like, there's the line, that's it. I'm not going to put up with that anymore. And so one evening, he called me a couple of names around, being a dark poet, whatever. And I just told him to, get lost pretty much and whatever. And as I was walking out the door, he punched me into the side of the head. And I was like, right. I was 18, 19. I was like, that's it. I'm not putting up with this anymore. And we got into a physical fight. And I knocked him down, right? And it was a weird, it's a weird scene. I relived that for so long, you know what I mean? Going around in my mind, how could I do that? And my grandmother came out of her little room and she was like, Jesus, Richard, what are you doing to your dad? Because I was standing over him, kind of, get up, will you? And all that. And she was like, you're going to kill him, you're going to kill him. And it was a terrible scene, really. It was a terrible scene, really. A scene that stayed with me for a long time. And
it was all that suppressed anger, though. It
just came out.
Yeah,
and even my mother, I think, just said, kind of like stood aside. She was like, she just got out of the way of it. Because she'd normally jump in the middle of it and try to save us all from it. And she was trying to protect us all. She was
almost like you needed that release or that expression.
Well, something had to happen.
Yeah,
it had to happen because it was a chaotic. At that point, it was a car crash kind of family dynamic. At that point, it was toxic, to be honest, to be in it. And it disturbed me for sure, my peace and my joy in myself. But so that took a while to get over that. When I met my girlfriend, who became my wife, really was the time I started to heal that stuff. And I was always very careful, Gavin, about who I would actually end up with. That was a weird thing, I had a lot of girlfriends when I was, in my teens and my 20s and all that. But they wouldn't have thought it, or anybody who was around me wouldn't have thought it. But I was very careful about who I dated.
Why?
Because I didn't want to. I knew I had the capacity to replicate chaos. I knew I had the potential to go into alcohol, and the potential to be dysfunctional, and the potential to meet somebody who's dysfunctional and then live in that dysfunction for the rest of your life. I knew that was a trajectory that was very fucking easily, gone into.
How did you have that awareness at such a young age?
Yeah, I was always interested in psychology. I was carrying out psychological studies on my family for years. In the book, I tell the story about doing prolonged teasing and taunting where I was tormenting my brother. I was trying to see their
triggers.
Yeah, their triggers and how they respond to stimulus and all that. It ended one day with me getting a black eye.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, that's the end of this study. But I was always like that. I was always looking at lives, and I was always interested in people's stories, and I was always interested in, like, when I was 14, I'd say I interviewed my gran. I set up like this kind of a system. I got a camera and I got a dictaphone, and she told me her whole life story over 2 days. And I was always interested in what kind of question would kind of bring something out here. So I was always interested in questions, which is psychotherapy, and I was always interested in people. And I've never lost that. I love listening to older people in their lives, and the moment where their lives, became something, or something came into their lives, or those real moments of change in your life. And my grandmother used to tell me, even when I was young, that when she was going out one night, her friend said, "Come on, we'll go out." And she said, no, she wasn't interested in going to this dance. Mick Delahunty and his band, his show band. And she was like, I'm not interested. And her friend said, "Come on, I'll flick the coin." And she flicked the coin, and in that moment, my life comes to being, because it landed in heads. And she went into the dance and met her husband. You know what I mean? It's just like, it could have been fucking tails, and I disappear.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And I'm really interested in all of that kind of stuff. I'm really interested in people's stories, how they see themselves, how they view themselves, and how they talk to themselves, and how you can overcome. Because I was thinking about, how do I overcome this stuff? How how do I wasn't living my potential. At 22, I kind of dropped out of college to mind my grandmother because she broke her hip. So I was her carer for 2 years. And then I went back into college again. But I certainly wasn't, focused on myself. My early 20s where I should have been. I was focused on my mum and my grandmother and my dad and that scenario. And, I was consumed by that stuff,
Were you trying to somewhat keep the family together or try to manage the family in some way?
Well, when I discovered his affair, you see, and I didn't tell anyone for a while. I didn't know what to do with that information. And I wasn't so much trying to keep him together. I was trying to protect my mom, I think. For sure, and try to keep her safe from this, but it was bigger than all of us,
Mm-hmm. And how did you begin to process the anger towards your father? How did you start that process of forgiveness?
Well, I didn't talk to him for 10 years after that fight. That my last conversation was like having a fight with him, and I didn't talk to him for 10 years, and I lugged around that fight for 10 years, and I hated him for a lot of those 10 years, and I was angry with him. And then you see, it's weird because I respected him so much as well. I respected him. So, it's your dad. Of course, everybody respects their dad. You're born to do that. And at one day, myself and my wife were talking about kind of getting married and that kind of stuff, building a life together. She was really the changing point of my life. Erica, and just a really good, decent, solid, beautiful person. Who sees you for all your mess. And all your potential as well.
Just as your grandmother did?
Yeah, exactly. And my grandmother's funny, because exactly, I never thought about that, actually. It's an interesting point. I often think she reminds me of my grandmother. My mother would say that to me sometimes. She reminds you of Gran because she's a great sense of humour. Yeah. And she doesn't take herself too serious. But you wouldn't see that sense of humour unless you were, unless she was comfortable with you, if you know what I mean. But my grandmother used to always say to her, when she turned up first as my girlfriend, back in 2002 or whatever, my grandmother would lean into her and say, "You'll get married now." And Erica never told me she was saying that to her, "You'll get married now." And I used to turn at my gran, and she'd say, "How's Erica?" I'd say, "Sure, I broke up with her, gran. I'm onto someone new," just to annoy her. She's like, "You will not. You'll never meet a nice girl like her."
She knew.
She knew. Yeah, she knew. Yeah, for sure, she knew.
You found your woman, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because her grandfather said the same about me when I turned up. He said he'll look after Erica now. He'll be a good guy for her to look after. Yeah.
So going back to the question.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's all good.
What was the question there again?
How did you begin to process the
towards
your father?
I was watching the Rory Gallagher. This is a weird intro to that. I was watching the Rory Gallagher 1974. I know you claim him up in Donegal, but he's a Cork man, right?
No, I don't know. We'll have our arguments with that.
Yeah. But
we do have a Rory Gallagher.
I know you do. Yeah, you got in there first.
Yeah.
But so I was watching the 1974 tour because I love Rory Gallagher. He's like, my dad knew him and all that. He would be ringing the house when I was a kid. He's coming back from a Japanese tour.
Class, yeah.
And I'd say, "Dad, Rory Gallagher rang looking for you," because my dad was like the big interviewer of in Cork at the time. And my dad was interviewing him in the 74 documentaries in Crowley's music shop, interviewing him. And I became emotional watching it, because I was proud of him and then angry with him. And I was like, okay, we're talking about getting married and we're talking about having kids, and we're talking about building a future here. And I was like, I got to work this stuff out. If I want to build a healthy future and I want to become the person I want to become, I need to work this stuff out, because I never even talked to my wife about it. She wouldn't ask me about it. She knew not to ask me about it. My girlfriend at the time, she wouldn't ask me about it. It was kind of like an elephant around us, and I wouldn't speak about it. All my brothers got married. He wasn't at the wedding. There's no conversations about him. All the kids don't talk about their grandfather. It was all this absence, But so I reached out. I contacted his brother, who I knew, and I said, "Look, I'm looking to talk to Dick. Can you give me his number?" So he gave me his number, and I met him in the Shelburne there in 2009. It was 1998, I think, 1998, when I had a fight with him that time. So, yeah, I went in to meet him. But I had no expectations, Gavin, you know what I mean? I kind of knew the person I was meeting. And it wasn't anyway, what I had hoped for was kind of like, I'm sorry. But I kind of knew that wouldn't come either, I kind of had to watch my expectations there. And so I didn't really talk to him again about 4 or 5 years after that encounter.
Because you didn't get what you wanted? Or was there a certain expectation there?
His girlfriend, who he had the affair with, was sitting in the corner, and I was like, I had to control my anger, right? I'll be honest now. I had a bad temper when I was in my teens and 20s, which I, struggle with sometimes still, right? And so I was like, I could turn this fucking table over here, you know. And there's the woman that he denied he was having an affair with sitting over there, and we're meant to be having a moment of reconciliation and a deep talk, and she's sitting over there watching me in this conversation. I was like, but I didn't say, that was in my mind. I didn't say that. I just had the conversation and I left, and I didn't talk to him again for about 4 years.
Was it too soon?
Yeah, maybe so. I don't know. I wasn't probably ready for all of that. Now I'd go to his house and I'd bring him. He's in a wheelchair and all that. No, you know, and his girlfriend is there and she's in a wheelchair as well. And, you know, so it's no issue. I wouldn't have any feelings around that at all. But
so how did you get there?
I think it was through psychotherapy, really. It was through the master's that I did, was a 4-year master's in family psychotherapy, where you have to explore your family. And I remember and I got annoyed about it. You do genograms in your family therapy training, which I have in the book there. Mm-hmm. And you put up my family tree, and I was saying about my father, and one of the head of the school said, maybe your father's not as bad as you think he is. And I was like, this is the first time anyone's ever said something like that to me. And I was like, kind of ready to challenge her. I was like, you know, you haven't lived in my life. You don't know what it's been like, you know. And I consumed that idea. And I started to think about it. And I started to think about him as a human being. And I started to think about him as a person who came through his family and his system, and his parents and how they treated him, and how he felt in his family, and then his talent, and then the loss of talent, and then the loss of potential, the bitterness, and then the alcohol. And that's a fucking perfect storm to warp a personality. And so I started to see him in all his complexities, Gavin, rather than this kind of, you know, linear bad guy that I had for a long time. Maybe he was a guy who struggled. Maybe he was a guy who had mental health issues, you know, and used alcohol, which is fucking bonfire fuel here, you know, to satiate that. And he certainly did, you know. And so then I understood him a bit more. It's very hard to hate someone when you see the complexity of the person. It's very easy to hate someone. You say, you're a gobshite because this, right? But it's very hard when you remove that, you know, linear myopic viewpoint of somebody, and you start seeing someone in the matrix of complexity that they came from and who they are. And then the good sides of that person as well, because I have his personality in me, and I have some of him in me for sure. And I see it, and I see the creativity, and I see the kind of, like, you know, the intellect and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay, that was a gift there for sure.
Yeah. Thank you, Dad.
Yeah, thank you for that one. Absolutely. I appreciate that genetic code. It's a fucking great privilege to have it. And I love it. And yeah, and so all of a sudden I moved from this angry position to a position of forgiveness and understanding.
Empathy?
Yeah, empathy. Absolutely empathy. And not wanting him to say sorry, or not needing. I'd like him to say sorry. I'd love him to say, look, that was shit and I'm really sorry and I struggled with alcohol and, you know, I shouldn't have done that to you kids and I thought about myself. I'd love to hear that. I mean, that would be a bit cathartic, but I don't need it, you know, and I don't look for it in our relationship. And we'd meet and we talk once in a while there, you know. I go down to Cork and I bring my daughters to see him and all that kind of stuff. And I know it's a thrill for him to meet my daughters, and it's nice for him to kind of talk to them, and they chat away to him and gives him a little bit of joy in the world. And I'm like, that's kind of, for me, it's kind of good. Yeah,
I love your genogram. And the as you put it, the matrix of what creates the personality.
Absolutely.
And it's something, and the reason why I'm speaking about the anger towards your father, I think it's something that, dare I say, every man from this generation has experienced or is experiencing, because they come from a father who's been sort of emotionally shut down, hasn't been present with them, has come from a childhood where emotions were not allowed to be expressed and therefore suppressed, and he transfers that pain from his childhood or from his father onto him, and from now you get it from your father. You know, it's sort of passed from generation to generation. And that's why I love the genogram, because you can actually see how this trickles down onto you.
Yeah. And
it's something I've done in my own life. And I think it's very important for every man to, for me, I know this is what helped to see your father as the child that he was.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what his life was like back then.
And I think we have a problem in our society of a lack of male role models. You know, and I never had a male role model, being honest.
Sylvester Stallone.
What?
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
They were mine anyway. Who would have been mine from the movies? So Arnie Schwarzenegger maybe, or what was his name? The guy in Jean-Claude Van Damme. But or Bruce Willis or something. But I never.
But they're not present with you.
No,
I mean,
Clint Eastwood.
They're almost like fantasy figures.
No, it's it's not real, and I really felt that a lot of times in my life.
I think a lot of men do.
Yeah, I felt isolated and like, where is this bloody role model? Someone to tell me, show me the light here. How do you be a boy and how do you be a man and what's been a good man and what's that like? And I had loads of men there, you know, but none of them were, you know, something that you kind of go, well, there's a good example of what you can be as a man. And I think boys today still need, you know, really need that. Like, and we need it in our society. Really good, upstanding men who are proud of being a man and proud of their masculinity and proud of the kind of positive force that they put into the world there. And we need more of it. I think it's a huge problem.
Do you think it's still lacking?
I do, yeah. I think it's better. When I drop my daughters to school and I see all the dads there, I think that's brilliant. You know, that's where I see it's changing there for sure. And I think the role of, you know, of dad and the role of being a guy has changed dramatically over the years. And I think it's very positive. I think we have to do more of talk about our, you know, opening up and talking and talking about our feelings. I think it's a very important part of the male journey. What's
the barriers there at the moment?
To being
this role model, being this masculine figure that society needs.
Something I often talked about. I never liked the term toxic masculinity because I thought it actually, and I work in schools all the time, I thought it gave boys the belief that there's something inherently wrong with them, and that it's not good to be a boy, and that they should be kind of somehow shameful of being a boy. And what I'd say to them when I'm talking to them, that there's cultural ideas that are not good for you. It's not that masculinity is toxic per se. It's that there's cultural ideas that have come down, residual ideas to our societies that say boys don't cry, grow a pair, you know, man up, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, that's not helpful. They're cultural ideas, and maybe ideas around masculinity is about dominance and subjugation and, you know, that kind of stuff. And I'd say, well, all of that's not exactly masculinity. Masculinity is strength for sure, but there's other aspects to masculinity too. And so you can be masculine and you can be sensitive and you can be, you know, feeling, and you can also celebrate the fact that you are strong and you believe in strength and all that kind of stuff, but that you're also sensitive. And I think we lacked that message with kids, and I thought the toxic masculinity message was negative, and I could see it in schools. And interestingly enough, actually, just tell you this quick one, it changed my perspective on it. A member of the trans community came up to me and said to me that she was born a girl, right, and that all her life, now his life, wanted to be a boy, and loved the idea of masculinity. And he said to me that when toxic masculinity became this really powerful, you know, word out there, that it really tainted what he had become, because he'd been desiring masculinity all his life, and now he was told that was inherently wrong, and there was something wrong about it. And I said, that's such a unique perspective on that, you know. And I was like, well, that's what I see happening with boys, is that they don't actually know what their role in society is. And do we want to isolate? That's what I was saying to people, because I got criticized for saying, I was like, well, does toxic masculinity as a term, does it connect boys to anything positive, or does it isolate them and make them feel inherently bad? And if you looked at those two and you'd say, well, of course it's the latter one there. So let's think about cultural ideas that are maybe toxic, and how not teach that to our sons and our brothers and our fathers and all that, and how to be more positive about being masculine, so then we feel more connected to something. You know?
Love it, man, because this is something I'm very passionate about, and I deem the term toxic masculinity as just a bullshit buzzword that's been used to shame men, because, as you rightly put it, if men feel ashamed for being a man, they're going to suppress those manly traits, and when it's suppressed, it's going to express itself in other destructive ways in their life, such as riding on the streets, or such as graffiti on the wall, or such as creating some sort of damage in the relationships, or so. Yeah, it's the suppression of that, but I think the suppression as well is created through confusion as to, okay, well,
what is it I'm meant to be here?
How do I act as a man? What am I supposed to do? So, what's your sort of opinion on a man in today's society? Like, what if someone asked you, what does it mean to be a man?
See, it's a tough question, and I'm really thinking about the rioters, because I've got loads of things about. I feel so sorry. I actually, people will give out to me for saying it, but when I see that, first of all, before I get answer that question, I see children lost in the state there.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
I was actually going to
That's what I see.
Say the same thing. I don't see men on the streets. I see lost boys who have been ridiculed by the system and
just completely isolated. And I'm talking about, and I'm even talking about the teenage rioters who are going to JD Sports, and everyone's saying that they're like, scum and scroats and lunatics. The language that was being used. And I'm like, Jesus. And it's actually, I have an article coming out tomorrow about that. And I was like, if I was 15, I'm being honest, and I try to be honest, but if I was 15 and my parents were lost into heroin use and my parents were cognitively impaired, let's say, they can't rear me, there's no support there, the state doesn't care about me, there's no one asking, am I going to school? I'm at home playing PlayStation all day long, smoking joints and whatever, and someone texts me and says, we're down in JD Sports, you want to come down and get some shoes? I think I'd cycle down and get some, if you're being honest, like, if you're so disconnected from society and you're so powerless in a society, this is your only exertion of power.
Yeah.
And so to label them as scroats, and of course their behavior needs to be punished. I'm not saying that, but there is context. And there is there does require an understanding of it. And when I hear politicians calling them lunatics and all that, I'm going, well, that's further,
just
exclusion.
Another label,
it's
like
just
toxic masculinity. It's like, okay, they're just toxic. Let's not explore that.
You can't help them at all. Yeah. And that's brilliant then for society, because then you're saying that you're beyond help. And what I'd always say is I did a PhD in inclusion, and I think we're very good at including certain minorities, right? I think we're very good at that in this country, and we celebrate it, and rightly so we should, right? But I think kids who are coming from economically deprived backgrounds, who don't go to school, whose parents are in addiction more than likely, and their parents can be cognitively impaired. I work a lot with the Gardaí, and I talk with the Gardaí a lot, and the parents can be cognitively impaired. And so we'd say, where are the parents? The parents are incapable of actually rearing these children and giving them morals and values and all that kind of stuff. And so they're lost. No one's talking about, like, let's think about including those kids. There's no policies around including those kids. They're like just off in the flats. No one's thinking about what do we do here. They're just thinking, how do we contain it? How do we keep them out of sight? How do we kind of get them some way, pacify them somehow? And it's like, no, that's how you solve this problem that we have currently. You get these children, you include them. You've got good policies around getting them back into different programs, whether it's education or not. It's not for everybody, because you don't come up in a family that privileges education, but you get them into programs, you get them using their hands, and I do a lot of work with a lot of work with teenagers who are on that, on the verge of going into criminality. Like, and what do they want? They only want to work with their hands. They want to see the product of something, They don't want to go on into college or anything like that. They want to get out there and work. And it's like, we need to start promoting that, so that we don't have what we saw there in our streets, which was, I thought, the exertion of like, a powerless child trying to show that they have some power in the system there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, instead of you create instead of destruct.
Yeah, exactly. You create, be creative, and you can be creative in our society rather than destruct our society, because both of those things are an expression of something,
Mm-hmm.
And if you feel like you're never going to be creative, I think you'll probably be destructive.
Yeah. But then the reaction response to that will just push them further
away.
Yeah,
exactly. Well, calling them lunatics and scroats and scumbags is just, that's confirmation for them from how the system perceives them. And they're like, I'm glad you kicked your fucking JD Sports in. I'm glad that, we burned the Lewis there, because look how you talk about us. And I'm not excusing that behavior. So please don't hear me saying that that behavior is terrible and it needs to be punished. But the behavior is the behavior. The child is the child, and we need to kind of get in there to help the child, so that the behaviors don't come apart of the child.
It's like that's the surface level reaction,
exactly.
But beneath there's a
way
deeper source. Yeah, and that's where we need to go. And again, it goes back to the necessity for strong role models in society today.
Absolutely,
for boys and men.
We all need strong role models. And that's it. I mean, we absolutely need people who are upstanders and kind of like, lead the way and be honest and authentic about themselves, and, talk about what life's like for you and your struggles and all that kind of stuff. And so when someone sees you as successful or whatever, and they hear, oh, actually, maybe, he's like everybody else. And that's why I kind of wrote the book, because I get positioned as an expert, and I have some expertise for sure, but I didn't come up in a vacuum, and I certainly didn't come up in, it was a family like a lot of families out there. There was addiction in it, and there was struggles, and there was joy, there was love. There was all of that complicated stuff,
That's what I love about your book as well, because you've got a story, and I've gone through a lot of therapy with different therapists and different psychologists, and what I found with them, with most of them, especially psychologists or psychotherapists, is that they're very closed off. And it's almost like they're on a pedestal and you're below them, and I'm here to to listen to you and fix your problems, and my life is all grandiose and I've got my shit in order. But when you hear your story, it's like, this guy's got fucking skin in the game here. Like, this guy knows life, and he knows struggles, and he knows strife, and he knows broken down families and alcoholism and addictions and afflictions and all that comes with it. So it makes you a lot more of a relatable individual.
It's funny that you say that, Gavin, because as you were saying that, I was thinking of my lecturers when I was doing systemic family psychotherapy. You know, it was intense 4 years. Brilliant lecturers in UCD and Mater Hospital. We used to have a one-way mirror, and all the lectures behind there, and you'd have, like, say, a conversation. There'd be a phone there. It was like something from the Matrix, and it's all this family psychotherapy, systemic theory, you know. And so we were talking, and then the phone would ring, and the therapist out here, the trainee, the supervisor would say, "Ask Gavin this," or I noticed that Gavin did that. When you're okay, thank you very much. And so it's like the whole system. The whole theory is that once you're in therapy, you're connected to each other. So it's like you need VAR somehow to kind of like watch over it to see the dynamics kind of going on, because you get pulled into the dynamic, right?
Yes.
But what my lecturers always said to me, "Richard, you know, stop with the self-disclosure." And I was like, well, I don't think I would want to sit in front of someone who I think is cardboard, or is perfect life, or has not lived, as you said, has not got some skin in the game, doesn't understand what it is, you know, to be a father, or doesn't understand what it is to, you know, struggle, or doesn't understand what it is to feel shit about yourself. You know, I kind of...
It really sets you apart, man. I have to say that, because I've had my experience with a lot of psychologists and psychotherapists that, again, there's a disconnect there, because although you could be with this person and I've been with people for almost 2 years, and I still couldn't tell you anything about their life.
Yeah.
And so it's...
I don't believe in that. You see, I'm like more like Carl Rogers type thinking, even though he wasn't on our course. But it was interesting, at the end of my training, I remember we had our one last session, and all the therapists were there. I remember they called me and they were like, "That self-disclosure you do there is just incredible. How do you do that?" And I just thought, I always believed in that. And when I was teaching at school, I was never like the dispenser of like, knowledge. I was like, knowledge is kind of flowing between us, and I don't know all the answers here. And the kids used to get a great buzz out of, like, you know, just like when I tell them stories about my life, whatever, when they'd know about you and they'd feel connected to you. That's when you fucking learn.
Yeah.
That's when you leave your guard down in therapy.
Why do you think you've gone that direction? What sort of...
I needed it myself.
Yeah.
I needed that person myself. That's all. I know that from my...
You needed to be heard?
Yeah. I needed someone to kind of be like that with me, and it was never there. And so I was kind of going, right. I remember feeling this, you know, I always had dreams of being like, you know, in the Beatles. You know, I always had dreams of, like, you know, music, and I played music and played the guitar and wrote songs and all that. So I'd always had that kind of like, you know, I'm going to Hamburg and I could become the next Beatles. And I remember sitting in class, and I was probably 16. And I remember thinking, just sitting there going, no, your thing is helping people. I remember that kind of thing, shit. To be honest, it's almost like a vocation, you know, where you get told you're going to be the priest, kind of. It's kind of like, oh, yeah.
But you knew it within yourself.
I knew it within myself. I had that moment of it.
You'd be wasted on the Beatles. So
exactly. Or I'd be dead by now, for sure.
Yeah.
But I was like, no, that's actually it. And then once I started kind of moving towards that, it was like fucking everything opened up.
Yeah. So you sort of, are you a believer of going all in on something?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
How do we encourage that with boys or men who are unsure as to what to go in?
Yeah, I always think, well, how do you know what to go in on? I always think there's signs, you know, there's always signs there telling you kind of things open up a little bit. I just know for me, when I was, you know, when I got into psychotherapy, very quickly I had a column. I mean, try to get that. I don't know how that happened, really, to be honest. And then out of that, I had TV work, and then out of that, I had other TV work, and then out of that, I had radio work, and it's just like it all opened up out of kind of like nowhere, really, for me. And I was like, God, that was incredible. Just like kind of happened. And the feedback I was getting, even just yesterday, a lovely moment happened. I get these moments quite often. The door buzzed to my clinic, you know, and I was on a 20-minute break. I was just been clients, and 20 minutes, the door buzzed, and this lady was standing at the door, and she's like, "Is this the Therapy Institute?" And I was like, "Yeah, no, it is, yeah." She's like, "Are you Richard Hogan?" And I was like, "I am." She's like, "I just want to tell you how much I love you." And I was like, "Oh, jeez, thanks very much." She was like, I was a psychiatrist my whole life. It's so refreshing to hear someone talk about themselves working in counselling. And I was like, "Thank you so much for." I was like, "You've really cheered me up. I was wrecked tired. Like, you've given me great energy, you know, for the rest of the day." And it was just like, that's kind of the feedback that you get sometimes, you know. Sometimes you might hear something negative about a stance that you might have on toxic masculinity or whatever it is, or about anything. I write about all sorts of things, so you get some negative feedback, and that's part of the game. But I think you get signs, Gavin. I think things like that happen, you know, where you kind of go, right, I'm kind of on where I'm meant to be. I think I'm in my stride here. This is what I need to be doing, you know, and you know, and I always believe that if you want to see change, like that Gandhi idea, you have to be that change. And sometimes it's hard. It could be easier not to look for the change. Like I'm launching the pornography petition and all that kind of stuff. You know, that's something that I'm very passionate about, and I want to see that change happen. It's a slog, and you're kind of like, you know, trying to get this thing to government and trying to get them to change, to get legislation around it to kind of protect your children. But I just think it's a fight that we can't not take. You know,
that was opens up the next avenue for me very nicely here, because I was thinking about a few things there that we've discussed so far in terms of toxic masculinity. About the suppression of feelings and emotions, about that then being expressed in destructive ways. Now, again, we can take the riots in Dublin and say that's like an extreme case of anger and bitterness and resentment being expressed. But I also believe it's happening on a somewhat minor scale, although it's quite major too, through pornography.
Yeah, no, it is. I think it's bigger than minor for sure, right? I think it's a serious ill in our society.
It seems minor because it's not all over the news.
It's a taboo.
It's
It's a complete taboo. No one's talking about it, and you know, and I've been saying it for a long time. And you know, if you ever want evidence of what this stuff does, if you ever watch Ted Bundy's last interview before he's executed. You could say, okay, this is a guy trying to, like, you know, excuse himself from abhorrent evil behavior, but he's got nothing left. He's going to be executed. And he said, when I'm in jail here, and paraphrasing him here, he said, all the men I meet who perpetrate violence or who have desires of violence towards women, he said, all of them share a common interest in pornography. He said, that's where, he said, pornography came into my life and it warped how I view women. Now, he's obviously pathological. There's something seriously wrong with Ted Bundy there, but he's saying that pornography was for him fucking fuel, you know. And I'm like, that's what I see. If the kid's got a seed of vulnerability, a seed of pathology in there, and you throw pornography, most kids can watch pornography and not become, you know, perpetrators of crimes against women. But we've got too much violence in our society against women. We have to look at that and say, well, was it 259 women in the last, you know, whatever, 10 years? It's a staggering statistic. I work with the guards, coercive control, serious problem. A major problem, and women obviously coercive control male too, but you know, it's more physically dominating when a man does it, obviously. And so we have that, and then we have Anna Kriegel case, right? We have where boy A consumed bestiality and BDSM. I mean, we have just case after case after case after case, and we have guys getting lost into pornography, and it's a fantasy world where women are dehumanized. And you know, any conversation around this has to be embedded in the socio-cultural context of that pornography propagates negative ideas that women want consent taken from them. There's the problem for me, right? That I worked in a school recently where a senior infant had consumed pornography. You know what I mean? You're kind of going, it's dystopian.
6 years old.
Yeah.
Wow.
Scary stuff, like. And I'm listening to this all the time because I sit I'm the chairperson of a national advisory council for schools, and so I sit on this board where there's about 15 schools from all over Ireland feeding into me all the issues that are going on, and then I'm trying to write programs to help with those issues, right? And so I'm hearing all the time about the issues. Pornography is the one that keeps coming. Schools, you know, children on their phone. I've worked with children drawing pornographic images, you know, in their copies, and they're only like 8 or 9. I've worked with kids who are saying terribly pornographic and graphic things to the mother. And I've worked with so many cases where, like, a young boy, his older cousin comes into the house and shows him pornography, and he's disturbed from what he's seen. Because in my day, Gavin, I don't know about your day, I think I'm a bit older than you here.
No, I think I know where you're going here, yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Pornography was like Channel 18 we had in Cork, where it was all a story. Some guy drops a pizza over and there's girls in the thing, and you know, it's all this kind of like fluff, and it's kind of like, you know, light pornography. It's not hardcore and extreme, but that's not what pornography is today. And I'm not a prude. You know, I'm not a prude. I'm saying about there's a serious problem here. And I see it across, as a clinician, I see it across the strata of society. I see it like, you know, kids and I see it warping their ideas around consent, and I see them warping their ideas about like what women want and how to even be physical with a woman, or to be intimate with a woman. I can see them really struggling with that, right? And I can see girls also struggling with what they've consumed by accident or by purpose, but it's embedded into all aspects. But I also see it in couples therapy, massively. Young couples starting out in their marriage, heading off into the future, the great unknown. But one of them, generally in my experience, the guy is stuck in pornography. And intimacy's gone. And they're only like a year or two married, and intimacy's gone. And I've worked with so many families where they broke down, and the family was just, collapsed because the father had gone off into pornography. And I've worked with Ruama, and I work with Women's Aid, and I've worked with women who've been trafficked into the sex industry, and I've heard their stories, and I've chatted with them, and they'd say all of their clients had commonality, and that was pornography. That they were coming to kind of mimic what they'd seen. They can't mimic it with their partner. They've come to this situation to mimic it with somebody that they don't value. I mean, somebody trafficked into sex. That's just for me to use. And so it's an industry that's been fed there by, it doesn't seem like it, but it's been fed by pornography. And we have to protect our children. It's not an option to say a 6-year-old can just go onto an iPad or a smartphone and put in porn and fucking, anything comes up. Is that what we want our children, particularly our boys, to consume? We want them to have healthy, intimate relationships with people. Mm-hmm. We want them to be thriving in their lives. And does pornography, from your experience, help you to thrive?
No way. I mean, I was that man who was lost in porn in a relationship, and I struggled with porn from the age of 13, and it was a very secretive, shameful place because sex was such a taboo topic and subject whenever I was younger, 13, back in the 90s. And it was not something I spoke about to anyone. And, even the term, wanker, from your friends, like, you're a wanker. Well, I do wank. And so do you. But nobody's, admitting nobody's having a discussion about it. So again, you just suppress, and it's expressing itself again through these destructive avenues of porn. And it does break down the intimacy in relationships. And porn was massive in my teens and early 20s, and what would happen as well is that I had these type of expectations when it came to intimate situations with women.
Well, it ruined intimacy.
And because when you watch a porn,
it's like heroin, and then you go for a pint. Sex is
exactly.
Like a pint.
But it's like you're viewing something, and then you believe that that's how it's going to play out in reality. Again, this was back when I was 16, 17 into my early 20s, and you believe that, oh, okay, I'm supposed to show up in the bedroom here. I get instantly hard, and we're going to have amazing sex, and she's going to have an orgasm, and great. And you go into this situation, and you have this already, or to speak about myself, already feeling extremely anxious about the situation because you have all these expectations you put on yourself.
Well, there's loads of research into it about ED, erectile dysfunction.
And that's a part of it. But the thing about it then is because it doesn't happen in the real life intimate scenario.
Exactly. It's not as
you begin
thrilling.
to use the porn all the more because that just replaces it.
Yeah.
And being in a situation where I have been several times when I was a teenager where nothing was happening, I couldn't perform, more shame. Because she reacts in a negative way.
She feels rejected.
She feels rejected. She embeds a further level of shame. And I say, well, that's fucking painful. I'm not going back there again in that real life scenario. So I'll just spend more time over here in porn, and it's safe here, and there's no fear of rejection. Or
what would you say to that 13-year-old Gavin? If you could get him now as he's going into that addiction, what would you say to him?
I would tell him that whatever he's feeling is okay and normal, and that it's how he sees it through a screen is not how it is in reality.
Real life,
and that before it ever gets to that stage in a relationship with a woman or ever gets to the stage of sex, that you have such an incredible connection outside, that work on building such an incredible connection outside of the bedroom
with
before you
with your partner, like,
connect intimately in the bedroom. Take your time with it, be patient, find someone you trust.
It's a really important message for boys to hear, isn't it?
Find someone you trust, because there's all this like hookup culture as well, and that's just porn as well. You hook up with a woman, you go, you have sex, see you later, and there's no skin in the game, there's no commitment, there's nothing there. It's emptiness. So
I don't think anything will bring you closer to like the emptiness at the heart of the human condition, the emptiness, the solving emptiness, as Philip Larkin would call it, that lies under everything that we do, is having a hookup with someone that there's no connection and emotional, between you. There's not. It's just like that. I think nothing brings you closer to emptiness.
Yeah, it is empty, and again, that's where it's like it's almost as if porn was like an evolution for me, like where I started with the VHS tapes, and you fast forward to the intimate bit, and that became that was then transferred onto magazines and Eurotrash, if you remember Eurotrash.
I used to love Eurotrash. And Jean-Claude, whatever it was.
The French dude there, Those
that was porn when I was
that was
in the
porn,
90s.
There was like women naked on TV. It's like, holy fuck, what's this? And then
Lola Ferrari or
that's right, and then came the internet, and that opened up a other avenue. And it's almost like it was an evolution. And for me, it got to the peak of like being in webcam chat rooms where nobody knew me, but I was receiving all this validation and attention, and it was incredibly thrilling. But it was also an escapism from a reality that I was dissatisfied in. Why was it dissatisfied?
It was avoidance.
But why was it dissatisfied? Because I wasn't working on any aspects of my reality. I was avoiding the difficulties. I was avoiding the challenges of the relationship. I was avoiding my own internal pain. Because all that's fucking difficult. That's
harder
tough
to work through.
So I just go over here and have a great time. But then,
the reality, the reality is, I always think you think it's the easy option, but actually it's the way harder option. The easy option is sorting yourself out and actually beginning to thrive and beginning to kind of feel good about yourself. And I think it's like, I always think it's like an astronaut tweaking a little thing in his navigation system. There, you do one little change and you believe a little bit more about yourself, and you look back about 2 or 3 months, you're going to go, wow, look how far I've come, And we can all change, and that's what the book is trying to say, that change is there for all of us. I mean, this is our whole being is around changing. At the minute it's sunny, you're sitting out relaxing, there's a leaf falls, and it's autumn, and we're always constantly in this cyclical process of change, and we feel that we can't change. And that's a lot of the clients I meet. And that's why I wrote that book. I wrote Parenting the Screenager because I met so many families who are struggling with technology, and I wrote a really practical guide. I'm always just trying to help and say, look, here's what you can do here with technology, and here's some boundaries, and here's how you do it, and watch out for porn, and here's how you deal with cyberbullying, and here's how you deal with. So I was doing that, and then with this book, I was like, we all come out of messy families, and we all come from primary caregivers and our attachments and all that kind of stuff, and we all have negative ideas about kind of ourselves, and we say negative things to hold us back, and we do negative behaviors, but they're just habits. And it's like the chains of your habits. I think Samuel Johnson said it's like it's too weak to notice until it's too strong to break. You don't notice you're caught in a habit until you try to change it. But then we can absolutely begin to change our habits, because they're just habits. Thoughts are just habits. We think just we have about 60 and 70,000 thoughts a day, and 90% of those are what we thought yesterday. So we're constantly thinking familiar patterns, and so we get negative ideas about ourselves. And there's about 6, 7, 8, 9 very important years in our lives, and we get negative things in there, and then we just live out those paradigms. And I meet in my clinic, 40-year-olds, coming in saying like, I know this is not how I want to be thinking. This is not how I want to be behaving. This is not how I want to kind of live my life. I'm kind of like burnt out, not enjoying it. And 47.2 is our most unhappy year, right, as a human being. 15 is our most unhappy year as a teenager. 47.2 is our most unhappy year as an adult. And it's all of the. I think for men, it's because we get. I think, and I talk about this a lot. I think we're very bad in this country for connecting to friends. I think we have them in our 20s, and our late teens, but 30s, we're generally into our relationships and we're moving in our career and all that. By 44, 45, I find it myself, kind of going, geez, where are all my friends that I had? And I moved to Dublin, obviously, and all that. You're kind of going, and I see it in my clinic, so many men coming in and actually crying. I mean, really, no, I meet this a lot, crying in the clinic, that they've no friends.
Loneliness.
Yeah, loneliness. Absolute loneliness. And brilliant, fantastic young men, the 40s, only young fellas, you're a young adult at this point. And they're lost in loneliness.
What's your advice to them? Or how do you help them?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, and it's something I say to a lot of 20-year-olds, don't lose your friendships. We got to work at that. I think women are better at that. They'll make the time. They'll go for a coffee. I don't think we're so good at going for coffee. We might go for a pint and watch a match, but we don't really talk to each other. We don't really say, Jesus, how's Gavin? You know, how are we getting on? If we're buddies and I go home and I said, how's Gavin? I'm like, I don't know. We had a pint, we watched the match, but I didn't ask him about what's going on in his life or whatever like that.
There's something there too, though, in terms of, and I've experienced this in my own life, and maybe you've experienced it too, that, you know, as you move through life, you develop new habits, you develop new routines. Like, I don't drink alcohol anymore, for example, so I don't go to the pub for pints or any of that, but some of my friends still do that, and there's an immediate disconnect there from things they're interested in and what I'm interested in. And then you step into this void of loneliness, and then you're there on your own. But it's like my values have changed, and as my values have changed,
your friends
I've lost this.
some friends.
My friends have changed. And I don't
true.
believe friends. And it's like, well, where do I choose? Do I just stick with what I value here? Do I stick to these new habits and routines because it's I feel it's more healthier for me in my life? Or do I go back to the friend group?
Well, yeah, I suppose the way I don't. Yeah, no, that's true, and I would see that a lot. You know, it's really hard to sit when you see really, really decent, good people like really lonely, and I think men really struggle with it. I think women struggle. In their 40s, obviously the menopause and all that, but I think if you're the eldest daughter, it can be really hard because your parents are elderly and you get positioned as the good daughter, the good wife, the good mother, the good sister. You know, you get all this lumped onto you, and by 47 you're going to go, wow, this is not who I want to be. I think men in their 40s struggle because they lose their friends like that, maybe. And I would say maybe it's about thinking about how can you be with those friends if you value them and they're worthy of being around you. And because that's another thing you have to think about, who should be in your orbit and who shouldn't be in your orbit. About how do you find a compromise there? Can you go to the pub and not drink alcohol? I know what that's like, you know what I mean? And you're kind of almost, as a person who drinks alcohol, go and have a pint there. You know, it's a bizarre culture that we have here around alcohol. There's no doubt about it. But I would try not to cut friends out because of different lives. I would try to kind of compromise there a little bit without compromising my values and my new way of being. I try not to kind of like a hard reset with them. Well, they drink, and I would try to watch that if they're friends that you want to keep. Mm-hmm. And I would say that we're very bad as men in this country as staying connected to each other through our 40s. I've lived it personally, and I've seen it in my clinic. You know, I've seen it unfold in front of me, and I hear the sadness, and I'm sad myself sometimes when someone will be crying in the clinic about it. I feel it, you know, and I'd say to them, I feel that sometimes as well. That I wouldn't have that many male friends to go out, but then I'm so busy, and you're working so much, and I have 3 daughters, and that's all I kind of want to do is be at home.
That's your values.
That's kind of, if I'm being honest, I don't want to go to a pub in town and think my kids are at home. Like, you know, it's just not what I'm into in my 20s. I didn't have kids, sure. But as I get older, where I get the biggest joy in my life, Gavin, where I feel the most grounded, the most connected to who I want to be is when I'm sitting down with the kids and we're watching I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, or whatever that, you know, they love. And we're sitting there together and we've got a pizza and we're watching TV and we're just chatting and laughing at what's going on, and we're just connected.
Simple.
Yes, simple. That's all I like, the simple stuff. Play the guitar together. My daughter loves singing. Play the guitar together. She plays the piano. That to me is like, geez, it doesn't get better than this. That actually heals my earlier childhood experience, if I'm being honest.
And isn't that masculine in itself?
Yeah, absolutely.
Showing up for them.
Yeah. 100%. I love the kind of man that I've shown them. I mean, I'm not perfect. I could lose my temper and I give out to them and all the rest of it. And they'll shout down, oh, there's the family therapist. You know, and
guess what? You're not perfect.
You know, exactly. Yeah.
You're showing that human side as well.
But this is what I say to parents. I think they labour under a misapprehension that we must be perfect as parents and that we must be clinical psychologists. And I'm like, no, absolutely not. I think it's good for your kids to see you lose your temper. It's good for your kids to see that you've got teeth, but it's good for your kids to see you have an argument with your wife, and it's good for your kids to see how you resolve that. And all of that is really healthy. It's because when they go out and they meet people who are difficult, they're not living under this kind of cotton wool coddled version of the life. You know, this is real life. We're living in a real family. I'm tired sometimes, and I'm hungry, and I'm annoyed, and you haven't done your homework, and you know you're not going to bed, and you're chatting. It's 12 o'clock. This is all normal parts of, like, you know, maturation and development, but it's how you resolve those things is the key.
Yeah. Yeah, I sort of want to just go back to that concept of the couples that struggle with the porn. And you have men and couples that come to you where the man is usually the person that's addicted to porn.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had actually as a woman, to be honest, in my clinic. Yeah.
Do you feel it's perpetuated, but from a anger towards a woman that stems back to their earlier childhood, where these men, and again, I'm going down a deep rabbit hole here,
Yeah.
but these men have somewhat been filtered into a feminized society where the mother was at home, the caregiver, and a sort of life was dictated on her terms. They go to school, the female is the teacher at school, and they are dictated by her terms. And they're having then to suppress their masculine traits, which then again, as I said, is expressed through porn. And I've touched on this before in terms of pornography, and it's something I've reflected on myself, is that a big reason men use porn is a way to express their anger towards women, because you watch porn and the woman is generally the one being dominated or controlled in the scenario. And you come from a conditioning where the woman has, or background where the woman has always been the one in control of you, and you felt helpless in that situation. So there's a great thrill where you see this woman being controlled.
I don't know, Gavin, about that now, to be honest.
I'm interested in your opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I see what I'm thinking about, do boys always see women as in control? And I don't know if they do or not, to be honest. I think pornography, I suppose, I'm trying to process that one now.
Yeah.
Think,
it's pretty loaded. Yeah,
there's a lot in there. I suppose what I would see is, Jesus, working in a family, working as a family therapist. A lot of the times the moms aren't empowered, and it can be a generalization to think that, that women feminize their boys, and then boys, and that. I don't know about that. I maybe have other ideas about that. I think boys get into pornography because they don't know how to express their sexuality. I think they're scared about their sexuality. I think they're intimidated by girls, and I think they don't know how to speak to girls, and they don't know what girls want to hear when they speak to them. I think that's the kind of stuff I would hear from teenagers in my clinic.
Which is the failure of the father.
It's without even trying to. Well, it's maybe a failure of society in some ways, but I think there's a lot of I do think there's a lot of lacking of fathers. I would see that as a common golden, maybe not golden is the right color there, but a common thread through a lot of the stories I work with families and boys, is the absent father, right?
Emotionally absent.
Yeah, well, even absent, but emotionally absent and not able to communicate about absolutely, and communicate his feelings or giving the boy any advice about anything, And I'd meet that an awful lot, that absence. And I think pornography is probably a way of satiating some curiosity, which is sexual curiosity is healthy and all that kind of stuff. But it's what they're satiating it with is my concern. It's extreme. It's BDSM. It's it's violent. It's domination. It's, that's not what we want our boys to think that girls want. Our boys aren't inherently bad. I've never met a bad kid in all my work. I've met some children who've done some very bad behaviors. I've never met a bad kid. I always look at the behavior, and I always say it's from systemic therapy. The behavior is the problem. The kid's not the problem. The behavior is the problem. So you kind of externalize the problem when you look at the problem. And I can see a young boy kind of going, wow, so I'm not inherently bad. Okay, so I've got control over that behavior. So I can actually take control of myself. So that's just the behavior. It's not me. Because we often just label someone, the behavior is them. They're fucking scrotes. They're scumbag.
Misunderstood.
Yeah, just completely labeled so quickly, and then they're going to live that out. And so it's very complicated. Pornography use is incredibly complicated because there is normal, healthy sexual curiosity. And I'm not saying for a second that boys shouldn't be curious sexually or girls shouldn't be curious sexually. Of course they are. We all were growing up. That's a normal part of maturation and movement towards self and all that. But it's what they're satiating that with now is what the problem is. And it's not unproblematic for kids. And we're seeing it through all different avenues filtering into relationships. And I'd sit with girls in my clinic. I'd have a lot of teenage girls that I work with. And I'd hear them sitting there in the clinic, really upset about what the boy asked for in the relationship. And I'm thinking, where did he get the idea that that's something that she might be interested in? I'm like, there's only one answer to that. It's pornography.
Something extreme.
Something extreme, absolutely. And maybe she might think this is cool that I'm into something extreme.
And is this where it's going? It's not just porn, but it's extreme porn?
That's what it is now. Porn isn't porn anymore. It's all extreme, Gavin. That's the actual harrowing thing about it. It's actually not pornography anymore. Because when you watch Friends in the 90s, Joey and Chandler are joking about they're watching porn, and then someone comes to the door with a pizza, and they're kind of going, maybe we're going to get lucky, and all that kind of. It's all normalized because it wasn't extreme hardcore stuff that they were watching. It was all light kind of pornography. It's irrevocably changed since the arrival of the smartphone. It's like gambling, but the smartphone has changed. You know what I mean? It's so secretive. It's so you can do it at any hour, at any time. And this situation with pornography it requires a serious thought on the government's behalf, because you can't parent this thing. Of course, you can bring in some policies and some cutting off apps and all that, but it's embedded into all aspects of the phone. There, it's all over it.
And then there's AI.
Yeah, that's it. It's going to only get worse.
Taking it to another extreme,
that's
which is
another thing to worry about.
The whole importance of this petition that you want to sign. And so everyone listen to this.
Yeah,
sign the fucking petition. And
please,
how can they?
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. Please sign the petition. Join me on official Richard Hogan Instagram, and I've got the petition there in my biog. Just go into it. I think we've got about 3,000 signatures so far in a week, which is great. But I want to get it up, to show the government there's a huge interest in this, and that there's a massive desire and will to get the government to kind of come up with legislation. Because currently, these platforms are absolutely lawless. I can't believe it now. I just can't believe that. It's like Wild West stuff. There's no laws in place that your 13-year-old daughter, I've got 3 daughters, and I want them to meet boys or whoever they meet that are healthy. And I want them to meet people who respect them, and I want them to have lovely, beautiful lives and share that intimacy and be healthy and all of that. I don't want them to meet guys who've been consuming pornography, and think this stuff is what girls want. And we can't sit back and let senior infants consume pornography. So go on to my Instagram, official Richard Hogan, sign the petition. And I've had a lot of support from a couple of politicians around saying, look, this is brilliant, we need to do this. And it's just, we need to show them that there's will here. That's when the government works. When there's massive will, here's all these signatures, this is what we want, this is what you need to do. And we bring in some policy legislators and bring something in.
3,000 is nothing.
Yeah, I know. It's nothing so far, yeah. I know.
I mean,
it's not bad.
Is it because parents just don't understand the incredible threat that it brings?
Yeah, well, I think CyberSafe Ireland had a report out there a couple of months ago, and it said that 85% of parents don't know what their children are doing. That's correct, I would say. A lot of parents don't want to think that their children are consuming pornography, and I'm saying to them they are. It's not if it's that they are. There's no way your child's going to get through to 15 without consuming pornography. It's just no way. It's impossible. It's all over their smartphone. And so we have to do something to stop it. That's the way I feel.
What can I do as a father to an almost 13-year-old and a father yourself to protect?
I would always do that. And I'd say this to parents as a tip. It's a really good question. It's about the levels of communication that you have with your child. And I'd say to parents, they can get it wrong a little bit. I don't use the word wrong, but they can make mistakes here, right? And they can threaten to take the phone off a child. And I would say that's the last thing you should be doing with your child, because they'll be secretive and deceptive, because that phone is their lifeline. That Snapchat is their fucking communication. So if you take that off them, they're lost. And then they're outside their friendship group. So they're going to do anything not to lose their phone. And so they won't tell you what's going on if they think you're going to overreact to what's going on. So what I say to my daughter, and I sit her down, I say, look, you're probably going to see stuff that you don't want to see, or that might be mightn't be nice, and I'd say it might be graphic, and I have this conversation where I say, what I want you to do, if you do, I'd love you to come and talk to me. We won't judge you. You don't get judged for anything here. We'll look at it. We won't take your phone off you, but we'll look at it and we'll give you some support around it, right? And that's all I say to her. And then I have to kind of trust her that she might do that. I'm hoping that she will do that. We have a good relationship. We talk a lot, and I check her phone from time to time. She's not delighted that I do that, as I'm sure your own daughter. But I tell her, when I gave her the phone at confirmation last year, I said, "You want this phone? I'm giving it to you, but there's a couple of boundaries here that are non-negotiable." And she would have cut off her right arm to get the phone. I was like, I want to hear you saying back to me, you don't take the phone into your bedroom at night. You don't wake up in the morning with it, and we will check it from time to time. And dinner is a phone-free zone.
Yeah.
So she said,
no phones at the table.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, that's it. It's not that technology is an inherent bad. But it's just we have to parent it.
Yeah. That's not going anywhere either. So
No, it's not. It's only going to get more complicated.
Off is
no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But parents can be so reactive.
That's the problem, you see. And then they take the phone off, and then the next time your child won't come to you. And that's like not desirable. That's not what you want. You want your child to think, well, they don't overreact. They're safe. They're safe to go to. So I've got a problem here. Loads of boys here, Gavin, are getting caught by a case. So many cases I've worked in the last couple of years. I'm working with the guards and all that. Where they're online, and I'm thinking to myself, I also think to myself at 14, 15, a girl connects with them, right? It's through Instagram or TikTok, whatever, and they're chatting away, and she's telling him how great he is, and he's handsome, and he's good looking, and he's hot, and all the rest of it, and he's thinking, fucking hell, this is amazing. Some girl's chatting to me, she's beautiful. Then she sends a picture of her chest, and he's like, oh my God, and she's like, send back a picture of your, body for me. So he sends it back. And then she tells him, I'm sending that to everybody. I'm only 12 and you're sending me pictures. This has happened lots of times. I'm only 12 and you're sending pictures of your body to a 12-year-old, you pedophile. And we're going to send, if you don't send us money, so it's a man, you know what I mean? It's not a girl. It's just complete scam. And if you don't start sending me money to this account here, we're going to disseminate this everywhere and tell everyone that you're a pedophile. Now, to a boy who's 14, what the hell do you do in that scenario if your parents are going to take your phone and overreact?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're completely isolated.
Yeah.
And this is a scam that's working a lot.
It just brings back a memory there where a previous guy that I worked with for a period of time rang me out of the blue, and I was on a different call or a meeting at the time, and 1 missed call, 2 missed calls, 3 missed calls. I was like,
what the hell?
What the fuck happened to this guy? Rang him up, and then something like that happened to him on Snapchat where he was exchanging photos with this woman and then demanded money, showed that she actually had his photos or recordings of the photos or whatever, and he was losing his shit, thought this was going to be circulated. I said, man, you don't do anything. Don't do anything. Just delete the Snapchat, delete your Instagram, just this will blow over. Just get off everything. Luckily, nothing happened. And as I said, this is all about how you react to the situation now. So
exactly. And like that boy, how does a boy react? Well, if you tell them, you know, some things might happen that are bad, you know, and if you get in any situation, we won't judge you and we won't take your device off you. We'll listen to you and we'll try to give you support. That's all we're going to do. Mm-hmm. If you're a 14-year-old and you have that message in your head and that happens, well, I think you're more likely to go down and say, Mom, Dad, I'm in a fucking serious situation here. Can you help me? You know?
Brilliant, man. Richard, thank you so much. And we need more signatures. And
yeah, we do indeed.
We need more people to come to your page and see the great work you're doing, experience it, buy your books.
My books.
And where can they find you?
In social media, is it?
Social media.
Yeah, Instagram is mainly where I kind of work off. I don't have a TikTok or that. Official Richard Hogan, or on my webpage, you know, Therapy Institute.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Richard,
Gavin, it's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, likewise, man. Thank you.
Cheers.